Well, designers, you made it through the first video lecture on branding. Now we're ready to dig into color psychology. Before we start this, I want to emphasize right up at the front that color, of all of your 6 elements, color, line, shape, space, color, texture, value, um, color is probably your most effective way to communicate and or persuade people. Because of all of those elements, color is the one that affects us the most. We have a very strong reaction to color. Now, we react on psychological levels to the other ones as well, but color especially is one that a designer needs to have an understanding of the psychology behind it. So this is all about color and how it affects us. You're going to find the slide presentation because I want you to watch this video on the importance of color as a designer and why we're spending so much time talking about it and what it is that you need to be prepared to learn about. So stop this video, find the embedded video. When you're done, come on back here. Okay, so hopefully you glean from the video that we react to color on 3 levels. There's 3 different ways, and they talk about it real briefly here, but I want to spend a lot more time talking about the 3 different ways that we react to color and why it's important for designers to know them. Number 1, you need to understand that colors will cause a reaction on a very physical level. That means kind of like it's in our genes, it's our animal nature, and this reaction to color is going to go across cultural norms and groups. It's even going to cross oceans and borders. So in other words, there's certain colors that have an effect on us all, meaning the human race, in a very similar way. And as a designer, those are the ones that we're going to focus primarily on because we can't control the other 2 levels quite as much. We need to be aware of them, but we're going to focus primarily on the physical, the physiological. That means the way our brain interprets them, which then has a physical reaction in our body to colors. The other one that we do need to make sure that we are aware of is the cultural connections that we have to colors. And this does vary from country to country and region to region. And it also will change based on demographics of people. So old versus young, men versus women, left versus right. So you have to know the cultural connections as well as a designer. That's really important. Those ones are a little bit more vague. The third one is the one that as a designer we have absolutely no control over, and we don't even really bother with it because it is so individual, and that's our personal reactions to color. For instance, I put an example here, the color purple. For you, if you think of color of purple right now, I want you to think about what comes to mind when you think of the color purple. Well, I would bet a week's worth of my paycheck that none of you thought of Phyllis Murphy. Why? You have no idea who she is, and that's because she's my grandmother. I associate the color purple when I see it. It automatically thinks of my grandmother because it was one of her favorite colors, and she surrounded herself with lilacs. She loved purple lilacs. So when I see purple, I often think of my grandmother. But you guys don't, and designers don't know that, and it wouldn't make any sense for them to design around just me and one person. But you should know that there are going to be those color reactions that we just have a designer. It's on an individual basis. Okay, but we're going to focus on the first 2, the first one primarily. One of the definitions that you need to be aware of starting now and going forward for the rest of the semester is you need to have an understanding of what this thing is. This is your color wheel. As a designer, it's what we use to help us understand color, mixing color, and color relationships, more importantly as designers, because we're not going to be mixing a lot of colors in here. But you need to understand how colors relate to each other on the color wheel because that's going to help us understand what colors to use together. Just like fonts, you need to know a little bit about fonts in order to pick which ones go together. You need to know this about color as well, okay? The term hue simply means the name of the color. It's literally, for us, we only see 6 basic colors. The human eye is pretty weak. Animals see different colors than we do, which kind of blows my mind, the idea of thinking of a color that we can't see. But basically, we see 6 different hues. We see red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. That's pretty much the 6 we see. Now, there's tertiary colors in there where they overlap, but those are the 6 hues. And a hue is just a name. So lime green would be an example of a hue. It's the name that we give to a color, and that changes. There's no like rule book for the naming of colors. That's why if you go into Menards, you go to Lowe's and you look at those paint samples, they're going to have crazy colors like buttercup yellow and bubblegum blue, whatever. Okay, so that's just the name we get. But for us, there's 6 hues: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. The next term you need to understand is intensity and value, and the difference between the two, because not only are we going to talk about colors, but you need to understand how changing the value, which is the lightness and darkness, that's your tints, your tones, and your shades, affect a color, and also your saturation. Saturation is the purity of the color. That means how pure the red is. Like, it's red and nothing else. There's no other hues in there. There's no yellows in there. There's no browns in there. There's no blues in there. It's pure red. That means it's going to be bright. Your most saturated colors are going to be your neon colors. And that's why, like, when I say hot pink is a highly saturated color, but the value is not in the middle. A hot pink is a highly saturated color with a lot of white in it. Okay, so it's a light value. You could have a super bright red, but it still be on the darker shade. So value doesn't necessarily affect the saturation and vice versa. Okay, so it gets confusing for people, and that's what I'm here to help you in class. But you do know not only does the color affect, but your value and the saturation level of that color is going to affect how those colors, people react to those colors and how they work alongside other colors. I'm not going to require that you watch this, but this is going to talk to you about the importance of color when it comes to logo design, but we're going to dig deeply into logos. So if you want to watch this now, stop the video, find it if you want to geek out. Otherwise, stay here with me and let's keep chucking through this. All right, so let's get started. We're going to start, like I said, we have 6 hues, but then we also have the neutral tones, and we're going to talk about color schemes when we get into the next unit on textile design. We're going to focus here more primarily just on color psychology. So in addition to those 6 colors, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet, you have the neutrals, which are black, white, and brown. Okay, we're going to talk about those. And we're going to start with brown, or I'm sorry, excuse me, we're going to start with black. So get out those note sheets. You're going to start recording some of this information. And I'm just going to go down these, talk to you a little bit about them, give you a little bit of background about the colors, and maybe pique your curiosity or help you come up with some cool Jeopardy facts as we go through these. So the first thing is with black. Black is a symbol of authority and power. That's the way we see it in the West. That's why judges wear black robes. Even in the West, or I'm sorry, in other parts of Europe, you will see black for politicians. That's why you see it on clergymen also. But also, in a weird twist, it also implies submission. So there's some belief that that's also why priests and nuns wear black, because it shows their submission to God. So you're already maybe picking up on there's a contradiction in the color. You're like, whoa, wait a second, you just said black is power and authority, but now you're saying it's submission. Yeah, so this is why it's kind of can be confusing in colors. Depending on what your product is, you can pick up on certain traits that it has and downplay others. Okay, so authority and power, submission. It's a popular color in fashion because, number one, black is not a color that tends to go in and out of style. Black is always popular, but more importantly, black makes people appear thinner. Why? Because it sucks up all the light, and it's not reflecting any light back to your eye, so it's making it literally look smaller. So black things look smaller, and we kind of think of black as representing evil. Why? That's a physiological reaction. That's an animal instinctual reaction to black. Why do you think, as animals, black would scare us? Well, it's because black is in the dark. When we are in the dark at night, because we have such weak eyes, we're in more danger. We can't see what's coming at us. So for us, when everything is dark, you're on heightened alert. It already feels mysterious. It feels scary. Something could be out there. So for us, we see black as evil. That's why in the movies, they're going to put your villains in black, right? Because it's a dangerous kind of color. And in a weird twist, because it's danger, it can be kind of seen as sexy or mysterious, and so it has that aloof, that, and again, that's another reason it's kind of popular in fashion, is it plays on that bad boy. There's a weird connection between the two. And that kind of goes along with the sophistication and elegance part of it. An interesting thing you should know about black is that black is popular with all economic groups. That means poor, middle income, or high income. Black is a popular color. So it's not a color you need to worry about staying away from, because you will find in later colors there are certain colors that if you are dealing with the wealthy, you don't want to use, or if you're dealing with the low income, you don't want to use, for a variety of reasons that we'll go into. White is obviously the opposite of black on where we would think of as our neutral color wheel. But not only that, it has an opposite reaction. So where black is kind of edgy and dark and mysterious and evil and sexy, white is innocent and pure. We see it as a younger kind of a color. That's why we often associate it with like godliness or heavenly or angelic. We associate it with those things. It's a summer color. That means that it keeps you cooler in the summer. If you've ever been in a black car in the summer, you know that that thing is hot because it's soaking up all the light rays. Like I said, it's not bouncing anything back. White is going to bounce it back to you. That's why white things tend to seem to glow, because the white is literally getting projected back to your eye. That's why we associate it with a summer color, is because people would wear white in the summer more because it keeps you cooler. Okay, so that's a physiological reaction to it as well. We see white as sterile and clean. It's a very clean color. Why? Well, because if we're seeing white, we know it's clean, because white is the hardest thing to keep clean. So if it's white, we know there's no dirt there, right? And so that's a kind of an animal reaction we have to it. So if you want something to seem clean and pristine, high-end, white would be your color. That's why it's a rich person's color. I don't know about you, but I do not have pure white rugs in my house. I do not have pure white couches. Why? I can't afford to keep that clean. I can't afford to have somebody come in and clean it every day, or I can't afford to have it as off limits like you might have in a wealthy household. And in fact, if you know anything about certain cultures within Hollywood, I know it's been years, but I know like Oprah Winfrey, if you know who she is, she would throw a white party every year where she would invite famous people within the African American community, herself being one of them, and they would dress all in white. Why? Because they were showing that they had made it. It was a symbol of attaining a certain level of success. With that comes money, and again, people of low socioeconomic range, they don't have white. White shirts are even hard to keep clean, right? So if you are wearing white clothing, if you are having white furniture, it means that you have made it to a certain level of success that you can maintain these things, keep them clean, and or not have to use them like normal people do. So it's a rich person's color. There's a weird psychological thing that we know that it encourages precision. So if you are a factory worker, and I know in the Apple factory, some of them, they will surround with white. I think it's because, and there's some study that suggests that it's because it just keeps you alert, because again, it's reflecting all of the light to your eyes, which is just keeping you up. And so it's keeping you a little bit more alert. So therefore that increases your precision. So in other words, you're not making mistakes. We got a lot of notes on red here. Red, of all of the colors, is the color that we have the strongest physical reaction to, and it's also the one that's been studied the most. So we just know more about the color red. So I'm going to kind of go over this fast. So the first thing that you should know is the color red, literally, you have a physical reaction to it. It's going to speed up your heart rate. When it speeds up your heart rate, that causes you to have to start to breathe faster. Okay? So literally, it's going to increase that. Because of that, we have associated with love and passion, because love gets your heart going, passion gets your heart racing, makes you breathe a little bit faster. So we associate red with those racy, romantic moments. Red is very noticeable. Why? Because it's rare in nature. We see red. That's why stop signs are red. That's why stoplights are red. We need you to see those things. Red is a bold color. It projects to our eye. It's on the visible wavelength where we see red first before any other color. And in fact, that's one of the first colors that babies see. So if you didn't know that, when you're first born, you don't see colors, because the cones in your eye, that's what just that determines colors, they aren't developed in infants, and they gradually will start to develop the ability to see color. And red is one of the first that they see. So that's why if you go through a toy aisle or clothing where it's products meant for infants and babies, they're going to use reds, they're going to use yellows and blues. Those three primary colors, those are the first colors that kids and babies can see. Okay. Red is aggressive. Just like it gets our heart racing and makes us think of passion, it also makes us think of danger. And it's an aggressive color. It's a very bold color. So therefore we suggest that like if you're in hostage negotiations, the FBI actually goes over this. They try to remove the color red. So if you were in a hostage negotiation situation, you wouldn't use red, or if you're a lawyer, you wouldn't go in with red unless you're trying to like take a really strong, aggressive stance. Why? Well, because red is the color of blood. We've learned to associate blood with red, right? Because blood is red. That could be a danger thing. Because red makes our heart race, makes us start to increase our breathing, it can be physically draining. It literally, if you're around red long enough, it can kind of suck your energy. You can only maintain that for so long. And that's why some prisons actually are painted pink, because it drains the prisoners, and hopefully the theory is it's going to keep them calmer because they just don't have as much energy. I know that back in the 50s and 60s, some colleges would actually paint the locker room for the opposing team as they came in pink or shades of red to drain the athletes' energy before they took the court or took the field. I don't think many of them do that anymore, but that's just kind of an interesting little fact there. So looking at the logos you can see here, you might wonder why now those companies, why they might have chosen red. What is about red? What is it about those characteristics that the company is trying to tell you about themselves? A little bit more about red. We've already hinted at this. Red is the color of danger, again, because of blood. Just some interesting facts. You don't have to write down all of these. Sometimes, depending on your insurance company, if you have a red car, you will have higher insurance premiums. Why? Because we know, statistically speaking, if you own a red car, you are more likely to get into accidents, and you are more likely to have tickets. Why is that? Well, we're not exactly sure. It may be one of two reasons. It might be because the type of the person who is attracted to a red car is already naturally an aggressive person, or they're a person who is maybe more of a risk taker because of the nature of red, so they're just attracted to red cars. Or it might be, especially with getting tickets, is literally the cop is seeing your car. They're seeing your car before they're seeing the black car or the blue car. And not only that, they're on a very subconscious level. When they see that red, they're perceiving you as a law enforcement officer. They're perceiving you as being aggressive, right? It's probably not, they're not conscious of it, but it's there, it's underlying. Red is an appetizing color. That's why a lot of restaurants, think about it right now. Think about all the fast food restaurants. How many of them have red in their logos? Pretty much all of them, right? Except for maybe Culver's and Subway, and we'll talk about why they're using those. It's an appetizing color. Why? Think about the best foods, like as natural foods, and I'm not talking about Skittles and M&Ms and those things, but the best tasting foods, they're gonna be red, right? So we see red as appetizing. Just a couple of things we associate with blood, fire, and ambition. We also think of it in the West as failure. Why? Because for generations, teachers would use red pens to make corrections, and that's why we see it as failure. That's a cultural significance. Blue is going to be the opposite or the antithesis of red. If red gets you going, gets you racing, gets you energetic, blue is going to have the opposite effect. It's going to be calming. It's the color of the sky and the ocean. It's statistically the most popular color. If you were to poll people, blue is going to come out on top almost always. People tend to like blue because of its calming nature, and it makes people think of the ocean. Blue is a good color for memorization and recall. So what that means is if you are studying for an exam and you want to try to retain that information, studies say that if you have your notes on a blue sheet of paper, you're more likely to remember it. Blue, however, because it is calming, you have to be careful of the tone and the shade and the intensity, because it could very quickly go to cold or depressing depending on the value or the level of saturation. That's why, like, if you want to make sure that it's calming and peaceful, but you don't want it to be depressing, you want to make sure your blue is a little bit more of a high intensity blue or a lighter blue. If you go to kind of a toned down blue, it gets more serious as you go. Like I said, and that leads me to the next one where it's like business like. Your darker blues, your navies, they're going to be less intense. They're going to be less happy of a blue. They're going to be more serious. That's why banks or other businesses that are maybe dealing with finances or legal issues or things like that, they're going to want to use blue. It's stable. It's a loyal color. It shows that you know what you're doing. It's a dependable color because it's not flashy. It's not red. It's the opposite of red. It's a tried and true color in the West that we see as a very commonplace color. Why? Because we see blue all over it. The sky is there. It's comforting, common color. And I just put that in here just for a little bit of fun. Mosquitoes are attracted to blue, so if you are outside, you might not want to wear blue because those mosquitoes are going to go right for you. Couple more things about blue. Similar to that dependability, blue is a loyal color. I hate to stereotype, but gentlemen, if you are going on a date with a young lady and you want to keep her around, you might want to think about wearing blue to your first couple of dates. Why? Because psychologically that's going to project loyalty to them and dependability. Girls tend to be attracted to that, not all obviously, but psychology tells us that if you dress in blue, that's why most business suits are blue and not black, because it's toned down. It's not as aggressive. It's not as powerful. But it's dependable. It's business. You know what you're doing, but you're very approachable. Unlike black, isn't quite as approachable. Blue is a common color used in religious symbols, and this is a historical context because in the Renaissance and early religious paintings, there literally were laws surrounding the use of the color blue in religious paintings that only Christ and Mary and the apostles could be shown in blue. It was a literal law. Like, you could not paint Mary Magdalene or a common person in those blue colors. They were considered the colors of the Christian gods, or God, should say. Why? Because blue at the time, during the Middle Ages and after, shortly thereafter, blue was a color that was really, really hard to come by. The only way to get it was to use a stone and ground down into what's called lapis lazuli. If you really want to geek out, you can search about lapis lazuli and why it was so expensive. So there wasn't a lot of blue paint, so they reserved it just for Mary and Jesus primarily in those religious paintings. So that's just kind of a cultural tradition that's kind of carried on, and the church might not even know that's where that, like today's church might not realize that's why they continue to use blue. It's just tradition now, but that's where that tradition started. We see blue as a color of wisdom. It's a peaceful color. And last thing here is it's an unappetizing color. Remember, blue is the opposite of red. Red is an appetizing color. It makes us think of food. Blue does not make us think of blue. Think of one blue food that's not artificially colored like Skittles. Could you come up with one? If you said blueberries, I'm going to tell you blueberries are not blue. They're actually purple. They're not blue. So when we see blue, we think that's not food because we don't know of any blue foods. At least the animal in us doesn't recognize blue foods, and so we think of it as an unappetizing thing. It's something we shouldn't be eating. And Weight Watchers and other companies that are trying to help you lose weight, they'll actually usually suggest that you put your blue on a food plate. You'll eat less food. Conversely, if you put your food on a red plate, you will eat more of that food. All right, green. Gonna start to speed up a little bit here. So green, we think of nature, right? Because it's all over. So we think of nature, serenity. Green is the easiest colors on our eyes. It's a wavelength that, like I said, each color is a different wavelength, right? We see certain colors easier than others. Green is kind of like right in the middle of the road, and it's easy for us to see. And there's some studies that says if you surround yourself with green, that's why they like being outdoors things. It actually can improve your eyesight. We're not talking like huge, by huge measures, but there's some studies that show it can in incremental levels improve your eyesight. We associate green with fertility. Why? Because that's how we know spring is back. That's how we've gotten past winter. We start to see the green popping out from the white. So we've learned to associate it with rebirth, regrowth. Interesting, brides in the Middle Ages, they would wear green on their wedding days, not white like we do now. White means purity, right? And we know, wink wink, why, what the importance of purity is, quote unquote, for women. Kind of an old-fashioned ideal, which is changing now. But the Middle Ages, green would be the color for brides. Why? Think about that for a second. What was the sole purpose, okay, of women in the Middle Ages? Right. It was to pop out those babies. It was to be fertile. It was to continue that family bloodline, to give birth to children. And so her wearing green would symbolize to her husband or her new family, hey, I have the ability to produce children. In the West, we see it as a symbol for money. Why? Simply because our money is green. If we're in another country that does not have green money, we don't think of it that way. And therefore, related to that, we then see it as a color of greed. We see it as a color of harmony and safe. That's why stoplights are green. Yellow. We perceive yellow as a cheerful, happy color. Again, why? Because of the sun. We primarily see the sun as yellow or shades of yellow. It's the warmth of summer. Usually we're in a better mood in summer, right? We're happier. Our mood, because of vitamin D, literally we have a physical uplift in our mental health in the summer, and so we associate yellow with happiness. Yellow is, because of the wavelength that yellow has, it's a very bold color. We see it right away. It's the first color that's going to come to our eye, but it's also really hard on the eye. In fact, it's a difficult color to see. Even though we see it, it tends to glow. That's why you really should think about not using yellow as a color for your text. Now, you can surround your text in yellow, but yellow text is really hard to read because yellow literally glows. And we know from the last unit that text is all about legibility, and if you have glowing letters, it's harder to read them, so you want to be careful of using yellow. Because yellow is such an intense glowing color, we know that too much of it is not always a good thing. If you're surrounded by too much yellow, after a time, just like red is draining, yellow is extremely draining and can force people to become agitated. There are studies that suggest that if you have a yellow room in your house, that room will be the place that you have more arguments in. Like, it's that one little thing, it's the straw that breaks the camel's back when you're in that room. Maybe you've already had, it's been stewing for a while. It's going to what sets you over the edge. There's also studies that say babies that have nurseries painted, especially in the brighter, intense yellows, they're not the toned down, desaturated yellows, but those brighter yellows, they're more likely to be colicky. We know they cry more because it's an aggressive color. We perceive it as being happy, it is, but too much of it, which it can happen very quickly, it can go bad, right? It's like cayenne pepper, right? It's a great spice, but man, if you use too much of it, you can ruin a meal. Just like yellow, you can ruin a design with it if you use too much of it. Again, because of the uplifting nature of yellow and the sun, we think of it as hope and positivity. It's a stimulating color, but again, if you have too much of it, it can literally make you nauseous. It's more extreme than red in that way. Just a little fun fact in here, if you're having an issue selling your home, sometimes realtors will suggest that you repaint the outside of your house yellow. Why? Because as people drive by it or they look at it for the first time, they're gonna be like, oh, that's a happy house. I want a happy house. I want my family to be happy that lives inside. Purple. Purple is the symbol of royalty and wealth. So it's not a coincidence that Dixon, their mascots are the Dukes and Duchesses, which if you don't know, that's a royal title. Their color is purple. Why? Because in the West, we associate purple with royalty and wealth. Why is that? Because purple dye, similar to the lapis lazuli blue, was really, really hard to come by. It was hard to make the color purple in early times. So only those really wealthy, like the kings and the queens, they were the only people who had purple clothing. The rest of us schlubs, we were all in browns and warm tones. Those cool colors, they were just harder to find because there just weren't things to make the dyes out of, because blue and purple is really rare in nature. Because blue and purple are really, really rare in nature, purple even more so, because blue, at least we have the water and we have the sky. Purple is really rare. You're only going to see it like in certain berries and flowers and some animals, not even very many. Because of that, it can kind of seem whimsical or fantastical, magical, therefore artificial and fake, because we don't see it very much. It's a common color that lots of artsy people tend to like because it is so unique and so rare. So if you are trying to come up with your company and you're trying to create a uniqueness to yourself, or you're different from everybody else, you're kind of a little weird, you're a little out there, purple would be the color for you. Somewhat changing for a long time. Purple was seen as a feminine color. That is starting to change, and that's I'm kind of getting off track just a little bit here. But did you know that prior to the 1900s, pink was actually a color that was associated with being a male? It was not a girl's color. That's a cultural thing. So this is where I said, like, colors can change over time, but right now, yes, we still see blue as more of a male's color. We see reds and pinks as girls, and purple still tend to skew a little bit more girly, okay, quote unquote girly, but that is starting to change. You will see a lot of men's products in purples now because, well, to be quite honest, men are getting a little bit more secure in their manhood, and so they're branching out a little bit more, right? In fashion, purple is a sought after color simply because it does look good on every single skin tone. We all know this. There's certain colors that we can't wear. Like, I cannot wear yellow. Does not look good on me. Shades of green because of my skin tone. Some of you might have a different color that doesn't look good on you, but purple is one of those colors that looks good on every single skin tone, right? So it's a popular color in fashion. Purple is seen as kind and gentle and humanitarian. And again, piggybacking on that rareness, it can be seen as aloof and mysterious. Brown. Brown's an interesting color. It's a very unappreciated color, but it's one of my favorites. So I'm going to go down the list. So we think of, in more recent years, and this is a cultural shift that's changed in the last, I would say, 15 to 20 years, we now see brown as a decadent color. And that's because in the last few years, there's been a trend of just foods, honestly, related to dark brown. So your dark chocolates are now more of like, if you want to splurge on really good chocolate, it's going to be dark chocolate. The idea of good coffee. When I grew up in the 70s and 80s, I mean, Starbucks was not a thing. People weren't spending tons of money on coffee. They were literally using like crystallized, dehydrated versions of coffee. It was the nastiest stuff ever. But it wasn't until later generations where coffee became a thing and it became a cultural shift where now we kind of see brown as a luxurious color, especially the darker it is. So like I'm looking here, it just looks more decadent, right? It looks appetizing. Some of the most appetizing things are brown, right? Reds and browns. We see brown as earthly, calm, and wholesome. Why? You got it. Yeah, dirt is brown. So we kind of associate it with that. And because it's so literally down to earth, we see brown as a relaxing, calming, homey, comforting kind of color. We see it as nostalgic. So that's why in the movies, sometimes when they show like olden times or like flashbacks, they'll put what's called a sepia tint, which literally means they're going to take all the colors and they're going to brown them down just a little bit. It's going to soften everything. Brown is a softening color, right? It's just a comforting color. We still see brown as somewhat more masculine. Why? Because of the rugged dirt, right? Guys play outside, that kind of stuff. Brown is a very honest and stable color. Again, because the earthiness. We trust the earth. We trust the ground. So therefore we trust brown. We associate brown with fall, primarily because we lose all the colors. We lose all of the green. So in the fall, really all we have are warm colors. We have the oranges and reds and lots of browns. we think of brown as warm because of fire and logs, and again, going back to that earthiness. But because of the earthiness of it and the commonplaceness of it, it can be seen as boring, right? It's a neutral color. It's not the most dynamic, so it can skew boring if you're not color or not careful with the saturation in your tone. Orange is our last one here, and it's probably the most unique color. Even though it's one of the main 6 ones, it kind of plays by its own rules. We're not entirely sure, but in the West, orange is perceived by most people as being cheap or inexpensive. And that might be because it's been used a lot on children's products. And it's used on children's products because, like I said, kids like those brighter colors. So red, yellow, blue are going to be the first 3 colors they see. Then they're going to see orange. They're going to see greens and purples last because they're the hardest of the wavelengths to see. But so orange is a color that's commonly used for kids, and kids tend to like it. And so I think, and this is my personal opinion, I think it's the connection with kids that therefore makes us think of it as being inexpensive or low quality. Because if you think about the products that are geared towards kids, people aren't spending a lot of money on high-end things for their kids. One, because their kid's going to break it no matter how strong it is, and number 2, the kid's going to outgrow it really fast. So I think that might be where it comes from. Like I said, it's a really popular color with children. It's fun. It's a festive party. It's a color. It's a party color, right? Because it's the life of the party. It's not as aggressive or passionate as red. It takes some of the sunniness of yellow, because that's how you get orange. It's yellow and red together make orange. So it's kind of taken some of the characteristics of red and some of the characteristics of yellow. So it's kind of a red that's a little bit more fun, a little bit more approachable, if you want to think about it that way. Because we needed a color that was slightly different than red, which doesn't mean stop. It's not pure danger. It's warning. That's why you're going to use orange. That's why your cones are orange. They want you to see them, but they don't want you to stop, right? They just want you to be cautious. So orange is kind of like a step down from red, so that's why we associate it with kind of like caution or warning. Not exactly 100% danger, not 100% stop, but like, hey, you need to slow down, or you need to know that you need to be aware of your surroundings. So that's where that comes from. It's kind of an obnoxious, loud color, similar to yellow. Remember, too much yellow, it can be really obnoxious. Same thing with orange, especially your brighter orange. The more yellow that's in that orange, the more intensity of the saturation, the more annoying that red or that orange can get. We see it as a tropical warm color. Why? Because most of the fruits and vegetables that we get from the tropical regions, they tend to have orange colors. And we see it as enthusiastic and an energetic color. Right? I know that was a lot. Please feel free to go back, write down some things for your notes. But your next lecture presentation is going to be on shape psychology. It's not going to be nearly as long as this. This is your longest lecture of the entire semester. So congratulations. Go get yourself some yummy red food to celebrate having gotten through this lecture.